Moving on now to an ABC News exclusive inside Iran amidst an incredible standoff between Iran and the United States. Our global affairs anchor Martha Raddatz got an exclusive interview over the weekend with Iran's Foreign Minister Javad Zarif. We'll have more on that coming up, but take a look at these pictures just coming in from our colleague Matt McGarry aboard the USS Abraham Lincoln. Just minutes ago, we received this video. This is the aircraft carrier that the military expedited to the Middle East just late last month to counter Iran. McGarry sent us this video from the strike group at an undisclosed location. The military there, as you know, in a heightened state of alert to deter what the Pentagon is calling pretty aggressive behavior on the part of Iran. Our Martha Raddatz asked the Iranians about that behavior and those allegations, also about the sanctions that the U.S. has leveled against Iran. Here's a little bit of Martha's interview.
Hey, Devin, we're here in Tehran. We spent the morning at the Foreign Ministry talking to the Foreign Minister about the sanctions, which are having a devastating effect on the economy here in Iran, and also about the possibility of conflict with the United States. Minister, thanks for joining us this morning. And let's start with the sanctions and President Trump's so-called maximum pressure campaign. What effect are you seeing? It looks like it's having a devastating effect on the economy.
Well, President Trump has called it, in fact, economic war. I call it economic terrorism. And the reason I call it economic terrorism is that it targets ordinary Iranian people. Even the United States claims that food and medicine are exempted, but financial transactions associated with food and medicine are not exempted. So people who want to buy food, who want to buy medicine and import food and medicine have to go through many avenues in order to circumvent the financial sanctions that the United States has imposed on us.
Given what you have said, if you did come back to the negotiating table, would you trust the United States? Would you trust President Trump?
It's very difficult. Because, I mean, the practice, the last experience was not very optimistic and does not provide an optimistic perspective for a future agreement. This is what I believe is happening to the international community. That is, people think twice before they talk to the United States because they know that what they agree today may not hold tomorrow.
So you are blaming who for the sabotage of the freighters?
I don't know, but I don't think anybody can blame Iran. They cannot simply draw conclusions based on erroneous assumptions that Iran was responsible.
So you categorically deny that Iran or any Iranian-backed groups had anything to do with that, or the Katyusha rocket in Iraq, or the attacks on Saudi oil?
We don't control anybody. Our relations with people who are our friends is not a relation of control. If it were a relation of control, we wouldn't be able to have this type of relations with them. We help people who defend themselves, but we don't control them. I mean, we don't differentiate between economic war and military war. The US is engaged in war against us, and a war is painful to all participants. We have a very clear notion that in a war, nobody wins. In a war, everybody loses. The loss of some will be greater than the loss of others.
What would you say to President Trump?
I've said it before. Threats against Iran never work. Never threaten an Iranian. Try respect. That may work.
The foreign minister, of course, saying he would avoid the use of force. It would all be about self-defense, but that has a very broad meaning. Devin?
All right, our thanks so much to Martha Raddatz for that reporting. For more on how the situation could play out and what it means for Americans in the region and here at home, I want to bring in our State Department reporter, Connor Finnegan, right now. Also, Behnam Taleblu. He's a senior fellow at the Foundation for Defense of Democracies. Behnam, great to see you. Thanks so much for coming in. I want to get your take on the situation between our two countries right now. You have a lot of family, friends, associates on the ground inside Iran as well. What are you hearing from them about this situation? Is death to America, those chants we see all the time, is that a widespread sentiment there inside Iran right now?
Devin, Connor, great to be with you. I think it's imperative to note here that the death to America culture of the state, of the regime, is not reflected whatsoever in the culture of the society, of the people. And the chasm between the state and the society could not be getting any wider. Yes, sanctions are having an effect. Yes, by all major macroeconomic indicators, whether you're looking at what the IMF is reporting or whether you're looking at what the World Bank is reporting, Iran's economy is contracting under pressure. But the bulk of Iranians continue to blame their own government for mismanagement as well as for failing to come to the table and take an opportunity, which may be a historic opportunity, actually, for the regime to try to engage here.
And we heard, our team on the ground inside Tehran heard exactly what you said, Behnam, which sort of surprised us here. Let's take a listen to some of the flavor of public sentiment that Martha Raddatz heard privately in some of the markets in Tehran.
I'm actually worried about everything in my life right now because I cannot see any future ahead of me because of the things that are happening right now. So it's like, okay, I'm studying, but that's all I can do right now.
And who do you blame for that?
I blame maybe government, but mostly people too, because we let this happen and we are silent, we say nothing.
You're an experienced teacher, but it's been difficult to
Yes, although I have 8 years of experience in Iran, but especially since, in the last few years, I found it really difficult to manage my expenses through my income, my salary in Iran. So that's why I started looking for a job abroad. And finally I found a job abroad in a very small city in Oman. Financially, I can say financially they are ahead, and that's why I decided I was kind of forced to go out of Iran because here it was really hard for me to continue life.
Fascinating to hear some of those everyday Iranians talk about their government there with our Martha Raddatz. Connor, I want to bring you into the conversation and pick up where Zarif left off with Martha. He said the United States should try respect with the Iranians rather than threats. Where are we on this back and forth about the potential for some sort of respectful conversation between the U.S. and Iran that keeps being teased by both sides?
Well, Devin, I wouldn't hold my breath for any sort of conversation just yet. Secretary of State Mike Pompeo said yesterday that the U.S. would talk to Iran without preconditions, which sort of seemed to indicate maybe an opening here. It's something that he previously had said that there would be preconditions, that there were 12 steps Iran had to take in order for the U.S. to engage with them. But afterwards, today, we've seen Mike Pompeo walk those comments back and now go back to that list of 12 things. And I think the issue here is that there's a difference between what President Trump believes and what Mike Pompeo wants to actually happen. President Trump has said as far back as July 2018 that he is willing to engage Iran, that he's willing to sit down with the Ayatollah, just as he's sitting down with Kim Jong-un of North Korea. And what Mike Pompeo wants, however, is something far different. He believes in that maximum pressure campaign. He believes in trying to change Iran's behavior, and if they can't change Iran's behavior, perhaps changing the regime through some sort of popular uprising in the streets of Iran. But he wants Iran to stop, testing ballistic missiles, stop its support for terror groups in the region like Hezbollah and Hamas, and to stop its nuclear program almost entirely. But that's not what Trump seems to believe as well. He said as recently as last week that he wants Iran just to not get nuclear weapons.
And it's not just mixed messages coming from the American side, Behnam. It also seems to be coming from the Iranian side. I wanted to ask you about that. We saw indications from President Rouhani, who suggested perhaps he would see some sort of openness to having a dialogue on any host of issues. And then we heard last week from the Ayatollah, who shut that down. How do you see this playing from that side of the equation? Is there any chance there that Iran might be willing to have a fruitful conversation? Or is that even possible?
Well, I think that's a great point. I think both sides are looking for leverage, both in terms of rhetoric and in policy. And when you look at the Iranian side, there's been a cacophony of statements. But, Washington is not going to be successful with respect to its max pressure campaign until it signals to all factions in Iran that there will be no way out but through. There are very few times in the history of the Islamic Republic when it's done a 180 on core national security issues, and that's only when the regime realizes, of course, that there is no way out but through. ending the Iran-Iraq war is one way that that's happened. The regime said something for 7.5 years, and at the end terminated the war under less than favorable conditions. The regime, of course, has every incentive to look tough in front of threats, which is likely why Iran was behind the tankers and likely why they put out a cacophony of statements saying different things. And much like the Cuban Missile Crisis, it's going to be up to Washington to pick which message from its adversary it wants to respond to.
And Connor, finally, want to ask you about sanctions. We've a lot of talk about maximum pressure, but then we saw last week that there was sort of a dialing back, a holding off on some of these sanctions that the Trump administration has slapped on Iran. It does seem that the State Department and the White House don't want to provoke this into a war.
Yeah, they definitely don't want a war, Devin. I think President Trump has made that very clear. But the administration has enforced sanctions to the maximum extent possible. They just this month ended waivers for 8 countries on oil sanctions, and that has really started to bite into Iran. It's a matter now of what, as Behnam said, Iran does in response.
All right, Connor Finnegan for us at the State Department. Thank you so much. And Behnam Taleblu with the Foundation for Defense of Democracies. I'm sorry, Behnam, thank you so much for coming in. Appreciate your perspective as well. And again, our thanks to Martha Raddatz in Tehran today for filing that exclusive material.